in, out, in, out. Okay, let's take a look at a next step up from linear equations, quadratics. So what is a quadratic? How do you define it? Well, quadratic is an equation such as, let's say x squared minus 2x minus 35, and of course to be an equation you need to equal that to 0. So that is the form of a typical quadratic equation. What makes it quadratic is this term here, this little square. A line would ignore that. A line only has x to the first power. It's just 2x. This is something x squared. That's what makes something a quadratic. Now, quadratics. This is an unsimplified form of the quadratic, and how do you find x? You have an equation, you have one equation, you have one variable. So theoretically, you should be able to solve this. And most quadratics, pretty much every quadratic that the SAT gives you will be able to be solved. So, to be clear, the graph of quadratic looks something like this. If you have this plot here, this is what a line would look like. A quadratic comes in the form of this curve. It's called a parabola. There you go. We can delve into why that is later. Let's look at solving quadratics in numerical form algebraically. So there are three methods you're going to look at. One is the easiest. It's called factoring. The next is called completing the square. I don't really like this one, and I don't suggest you use it, but it is there if you need it. And third is the quadratic formula. This is a brute force method of solving things, and chances are it's easier to solve it. And yeah, anyway. So let's look at factoring. Let's look at this equation that we have, right? If I can, okay. X squared minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. Now, what factoring says is that you take this equation and you find out what two numbers add up to this. So we will call these the A term, the B term, and the C term. This is going to be important. So what two numbers add up to B and multiply into C? So you're going to just have to holistically look at this and say, what combination of numbers would multiply into 35? Chances are it'd be 7 and 5 are what you're looking at. So what combination of positive or negative 7 or positive or negative 5 would add up to negative 2? Well, chances are it's negative 7 and positive 5. Those are going to be your, wait, negative 7, positive 5, oh, hang on. Is it negative 7? We're going to cut this part out, of course. Fuck. Well, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at this rationally, logically. To solve this, you're going to set this up as a quadratic. It's going to have two factors. That's what they're called, factors. It's got x plus or minus some number times x plus or minus some number. So that's going to give you x times x is a squared, x times a number is is like some number times x times a number is some number times x, and a number times a number is a number. That's how you get that. So what do you do? Well, to multiply into a negative number, one is going to be positive, the other is going to be negative, right? So let's say the way this works out is you can use guess and check, but it is x plus 5, x minus 7. So you can use what's called FOIL. If you don't know what FOIL is, that's important to know. FOIL is a way of expanding out quadratic or these sort of looking things where it's x plus or minus something times x plus or minus something. So the way you do it is you can multiply things out. So these are two things that you just multiply. So this is called, you multiply the first, then you multiply the outside, then you multiply the inside, and then you multiply the last. So to really quickly do that, that's x times x, which is x squared. The outside is x times negative 7, which is negative 7x. Then the inside is 5 times x, which is plus 5x. and the last is 5 times negative 7, which is negative 35. That equals x squared minus 2x minus 35. Huzzah! So you've successfully factored. That's one way of doing this. So let's look at another. The other is called complete. The next is called completing the square. So let's rewrite this equation: x squared. Let's do this in a different color, actually. Not that color. Screw it. No. Yeah, let's do it. Minus 2x minus 35 equals 0. So completing the square, here's the procedure, okay? You're going to take this third term, the c term, this number, and you're going to move it to this side. So plus 35 plus 35. So now you have x squared minus 2x equals 35. This is another pretty neat way of doing it. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take this b term and you're going to half it. So what's half of negative 2? It's negative 1. Then you're going to square this. So negative 1 squared is 1. So you have this number 1 here. And what you're going to do is you're going to add this here and here. So what this looks like is, in a different color, x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 35 plus 1, which is a fair statement to make. You've just added 1 to both sides. So what does this do for you? Well, x squared minus 2x plus 1 can be factored. It's the same as x minus 1, and you can FOIL that out if you don't believe me. So that equals 36. What does this do for you? Well, x minus 1 times x minus 1 is x minus 1 squared equals 36. And now you can square root both sides. X minus 1 equals plus or minus 6. So x equals 7 or x equals negative 5. And there you go. Shut the fuck up. Oh my god. In, out, in, out. Alright, sorry for the little jump cut, but anyway, let's look at the third method of solving quadratics, the quadratic formula. Now, you have this equation here. Obviously, you have your a term, b term, c term. Always make sure your quadratic adds up to 0. That's the correct way. That's how it's going to look, typically. So, if you really want to do this, you just have to commit this formula to memory. There's no neat way of doing it. Like, this is just it. Some mathematician way back when realized, hey, this is something that I've been doing the whole time, so he came up with a formula, like when he was solving quadratics. So, the formula states that the solution is negative. Let's do this. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's it. That's the formula. Just, that's how it's done. So to plug this in, let's see, negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 35 all over 2 times 1. So that's 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 35 times 4 is 140. 140 all over 2. That's 2 plus or minus the square root of 144. Oh, hey, over 2. That's 2 plus or minus 12 over 2. So 2 plus 12 over 2 equals 14 over 2 equals 7. 2 minus 12 over 2 equals negative 10 over 2 equals negative 5. Now, an important thing to note, when you're factoring, or when you're in a factored form, right? X minus 7, x plus 5. So, despite 7 being the solution, positive numbers are subtracted from x, negative numbers are added to x. We can look at that on a graph if people have questions about that, because it is kind of something you have to wrap your head around. Anyway, this is Solving Quadratics, and I hope that was helpful.